Hello and welcome back to the channel. When Bretheren Lee released his latest video, which is entitled The Watchtower Had No Permission, I hadn't planned on doing a response video. There are some things that he does in the video that I would do differently, and I gave him some feedback on that in the comments on the video. But for the most part, I agree with what he says. Early on in the video, he's going to explain that he's there to talk about the 1914 doctrine that the Watchtower uses to justify their position as God's chosen organization and to establish the authority for the governing body. And he's absolutely right to question that.
One of the reasons we focus on this 1914 teaching of the Watchtower is because not that it's the only teaching the Watchtower is wrong, but it is one of the major teachings that cause people to believe that these people, these men up in New York, are God's channel, the governing body.
Lee definitely understates this a little bit here. Not only is 1914 one of the important doctrines in their organization, but it is central. It is the foundation, it's the cornerstone. Okay, it is the linchpin on which all of their claims of authority rest. If 1914 didn't happen the way they say it did, then 1918 didn't happen, and they weren't selected by God and Jesus as the only true worshipers and therefore Jehovah's organization. And if 1918 didn't happen, then they were not selected by Jesus to lead the organization as the faithful and discreet slave in 1919. So if 1914 is disproven, then the entire tower comes tumbling down. Lee goes on from there to talk about what the Watchtower claims and to explain how, in order to arrive at their 1914 doctrine, they're twisting up Daniel chapter 4, where it talks about Nebuchadnezzar having a dream. And Lee is absolutely right. For example, the dream is clearly about Nebuchadnezzar, clearly. And yet the Watchtower says in the Bible, trees are sometimes used to represent rulership. So the chopping down of the symbolic tree represents how God's rulership, as expressed through the kings at Jerusalem, would be interrupted. Lee goes on to call them out on that and to show quite clearly that that passage and the dream are about Nebuchadnezzar. And that's it. That's the extent of it. That's the scope. And all of this other stuff that the Watchtower worked into it is of their own device. Where things start to go a little south, though, is when I apparently commit the grievous sin of suggesting that Lee could do a better job of actually documenting what he quotes the Watchtower folks as saying. He just says they believe this, they say that. He doesn't provide any references, doesn't quote any resources, anything like that. And so to support his position, I created a lengthy list of quotes from all kinds of Watchtower documents that completely back up what Lee claims they said, because he nailed it. And so I went out and dug up the documentation that supports what he said. I have to admit that I was both surprised and very disappointed by the response that I got from him to those comments and to that information, and that is why I'm doing this response video. The attitude of the response is basically that we don't need that information, we don't need evidence. It's clearly evident to anybody that that's the case. So, let's not bother with proof. I challenged Lee on that, asking him how he would feel if he was accused of something. Certainly, he would want the evidence, right? He would want somebody to prove that he'd actually said what they accused him of saying. And this is the response that I got from him on that. I'm not surprised that he drugged Donald Trump into this because he hates himself some Donald Trump. He really does. My question is, though, how is Trump relevant and why is he challenging me on that? If he has a problem with what Trump is doing about boats in the Caribbean, he should take it up with Trump. I'm not responsible for Trump. That's basically all I wanted to say about the video. Like I said, Lee does a pretty good job of taking the Watchtower to task for their misuse of scripture here. Before I close, though, I just want to clear the air a little bit with Lee himself by offering 3 pieces of advice. The first one is really basic. It's how to be a human 101, everything I need to know I learned in kindergarten kinds of stuff. And it's show a little gratitude. If somebody goes through effort to help you out, the appropriate response is not, I don't want or need your help. The appropriate response is thank you. The second piece of advice is to always remember that feedback is a gift. Whether it's praise for something you're doing well or constructive criticism about an area where you could improve, people offer you that feedback because they want you to succeed. When you reject it, you become the kind of person to them that they don't want to help, and it wrecks your own credibility. It also chases away future feedback, which prevents you from getting better, from growing and improving. And the third piece of advice that I would have for Lee is show your work. You throw out a lot of scriptural citations, but never provide the text of the scripture or explain why you think that scripture proves your point. You also extensively quote other people, but don't ever provide references that prove they said what you say they said. If somebody says something about you, though, you want proof. So that's a behavioral tick there that you need to really get a handle on if you ever want to be taken seriously as a teacher. As always, thanks very much for watching.